A Piper Seneca takes off from Bethlehem Airport. At 250 feet above ground level, the left engine loses power. Find out what happens next on this episode of Lesotho's Pride. On the 8th of October 2012, a Piper Seneca PA-34-200T T4 Turbo is preparing to depart from Bethlehem Airport for a ferry flight to Lanseria International Airport. Bethlehem Airport is located in the eastern side of Free State Province and just north of Lesotho. It's a small airport used for general aviation, and as it stands, it is only used for VFR traffic, visual flight rules traffic. In the past, prior to around 2019, it had an NDB approach brake cloud procedure, so it did allow for instrument flight rules traffic. It has two runways available to use, runway 11 and 29, which is asphalt, and then runway 13 and 31, which is grass. And at the time of the accident, the runway was actually runway 1230. Airport elevation is at 5,561 feet above mean sea level. The pilot, according to Jim's report, is that the aircraft was operating under Part 91 operations, as it was only a ferry flight and it had no passengers on board. The difference between Part 91 and Part 135, which we'll talk about later on, is that Part 91 is the encompassing law for Part 135, Part 121, etc., etc. And what Part 135 operations are passenger or transport-based operations for passengers up to 19. Anything beyond 19 passengers is Part 121 operations. All that means is Part 135 and Part 121 are just stricter regulations to Part 91. The pilot was a 20-year-old male who was operating with a valid commercial pilot license. He had 531 hours of total time and 66.9 hours on the aircraft type. He had achieved his multi-engine piston rating back on the 25th of February 2012. The aircraft is a 1978 Piper Seneca PA-34-200T. From manufacture, it had flown a total of 4,511.41 hours. It was registered under Part 135 operations, and prior to this accident, it had one incident that occurred back in 2005 in Mozambique. Looking at the mass and balance of the aircraft, its takeoff weight was very light. It had a takeoff weight of 3,424 pounds and a max takeoff weight of 4,570 pounds. 2 hours prior to flight, the aircraft was refueled and it had approximately 33.5 US gallons of fuel in each tank. Weather on the day was found to be good. The wind direction came from 090 degrees at 11 knots. Visibility was more than 10 kilometers on the day. Temperature was 23 degrees Celsius with a dew point of 9 degrees Celsius, making it a low chance of rain. And cloud base was at 9,000 feet with a few clouds in the vicinity. The pilot lined up on runway 12. At approximately 11:43 Zulu, he had begun his takeoff run with 10 degrees of flaps selected. The aircraft had proceeded to climb and about 250 feet AGL above ground level. The left-hand engine RPM had suddenly decreased from 2,450 to 1,500. He applied power to both engines, but the left-hand engine failed completely, and according to the report, he executed a left-hand turn, trying to return back to the runway to do a forced landing. But due to a rapid loss of height, he was forced to execute a forced landing in a field which is just west of the airport. He flew over the airport service road, where upon landing in the field, he had rolled for 400 meters, through a ditch, hitting a fence, then a lamppost, and finally coming to rest just short of a house in Panorama residential area. Luckily in this accident, the pilot was fine. The aircraft, on the other hand, was not. The front landing gear had completely shuttered off. The left engine propeller had completely dislodged itself, but surprisingly was found totally intact. So what caused this crash? By process of elimination, the left engine was removed and transported to an approved maintenance facility. It was too damaged to test run, but the engine was torn down and no anomalies were found. The same was done to its fuel system components, and once again, no anomalies were found with it. Upon inspection of the cockpit, it was found that the fuel selectors were set to cross-feed. However, according to the pilot's operating handbook, the fuel selectors should have been placed on the on position. The manufacturer, Piper, was inquired as to why the cross-feed position should not be selected when taken off, but they could not find any early documentation stating or giving reason as to why that should be the case. Whatever the case, the fuel selectors should have been switched to the on position as the engines were starved of fuel. That was the cause, but could have the pilot recovered from his inadvertent emergency? Possibly, yes. When a pilot gets the multi-engine piston rating, the main focus on the training is engine failure procedures and asymmetric flight. That's because a light twin is only slightly more difficult to handle than a single until an engine fails. It then demands immediate and professional action. The last time this pilot had practiced engine failure after takeoff was during his multi-engine piston training, which was approximately 8 months prior to this accident. So even though he had flown 39.9 hours on the aircraft type in the past 90 days prior to this accident, he wasn't mentally and motor skilled ready to handle that emergency situation when it came about. Also, allegedly, the pilot had not completed a self-takeoff briefing just prior to takeoff. And what a self-takeoff briefing is essentially a briefing said out loud to help you prepare for the event. You are told as a pilot to say it out loud because you better remember it than if you say it within yourself. The action items to complete during an engine failure after takeoff are quite a number. And so due to the engine selectors not being set to on, the engine failed. And because he was not mentally prepared for the event, because he did not have a self-takeoff briefing, when the engine did fail, the left-hand side, the aircraft naturally turned to its dead side engine, which is the left-hand side, and he instinctively wanted to return back to the field. But with only 250 feet to play with, thankfully he instinctively leveled the wings prior to hitting the ground. So the lesson for today is do your takeoff briefing for every single takeoff that you're going to do. Second to that, if you have the resources available and the time available, do engine failure after takeoff with an instructor in an aircraft more than just during your license renewal. And at the least, if you do not have the funds available, do it in your head, or if you have a flight simulator program on your computer, practice there. Or if you do have access to a simulator, a certified simulator by the Civil Aviation Authority, then practice there as well. It's slightly cheaper than taking out an aircraft. Lastly, follow your checklist to the T so that you do not forget any critical items on the list. That's it for today. Thank you very much, guys, for joining in. Thanks for watching. If you like this type of content, please subscribe to my channel and like this video. I post videos on Wednesdays. If you want to keep up to date with this channel and myself, you can follow me on my social media on Instagram. Thanks very much, guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.